So you left us on Wellington Country Park with a view to going on to Frimley to catch that elusive £40 common. I mean, at the time, I was very sort of switched on to venues around that Berkshire area. You know, bearing in mind, I live, like I say, 184 miles away, but I was with work, with Tracker, it made it easier because what I used to do is I would take my kit with me, sort of on a Thursday, if you like, and I'll do my work, or like a bit of work, end up on the lake. And Frimley was only probably 5-6 miles, perhaps a touch more from Welly. So it was a similar journey, quite easy to get to. It could be a pain in the backside, but it was never a pain in the backside going because I was always be at work. So I would either be doing shops around Staines or Yateley, or I mean, even if places like a tackle box in Dartford, you know, that's only an hour and probably an hour and 20 minutes from Frimley. Well, if I was going from home, it'd be a 4-hour drive. So, but it was a natural progression. I was in that area. I'd done a lot of digging because I knew a lot of people that would fish Frimley before, and I'd sort of, it kind of, I think it suited. There was enough fish in there. I don't know exactly. It wasn't understocked, and I guess the lake is probably 12 to 15 acres in size. Plenty of swims. I mean, bear in mind, I only fished it from June until November of the 2007, which we will come on to. So I'd never seen the place. All I knew about it was beautiful, tree-lined, and there was this main bar that was the main feature of the lake. Some of it was exposed, not the sort of dry land. Other parts it would peek under just slightly, but you could visibly see this bar. It was very, very recognisable. So I knew that the bulk of those fish, or the big fish, would always come out around that bar. So I'd spoke to people that I trust, and they said, "Luke Tong," he said, "you need to be around that bar, whether it's the Stick, the Noddy, the Secret, Deep Point, double boards." There was another swim next to double boards which gave you access to the open water as well. I can't remember what that was now. But anyway, so I remember going there for the first time, never seen the place. And at the time, the only way you could do nights was you either had to be a bailiff or you had to have a gold card. Well, a gold card at the time was 1,500 quid. So not everybody could afford that, you know. Now I blagged one off Barney. Mick Barnes was the gaffer at Cemex, and we did a bit of a deal where I would do some magazine features on Cemex waters because it was run by Cemex at the time, and in return I'd get a gold card for free. I'd got no intentions really of fishing any of the other waters at the time, because for me I only fish one water at a time if I can help it, especially when you're travelling like that, because you get in tune with it. You really do get in tune. If you're there week in, week out, you're building up a pattern, you're seeing where the fish are coming from, you're fine tuning them spots, and it helps. It really does aid. And you find any successful campaign angler, and they are at it, man. You know, they're there every week, they're putting bait in, they're pre-baiting, they're just doing everything they can to be in tune with that lake. So basically, I almost knew the names of all the swims around the bar before I went onto the lake, because I'd kind of already made my mind up where I wanted to be. I wasn't bothered about which swim. All I wanted was a swim around that bar. Now, the main swim that got the most attention, well, there was two. There was the Stick, which was short side of the bar, and then you got the double boards. You've probably all heard about the double board swim. Nigel Sharp, over the years, Ian Chilcott absolutely destroyed the place, and he was baiting, and he predominantly stayed in the double boards. Now, Ian was a midweek angler, predominantly in the winter, so the lake was quiet. Ian lived like 10 minutes from the lake. It was perfect, so he was piling bait in. It was just everything that he wanted from a water for the winter. You know, there was plenty of fish to keep him busy. If the bites dried up a bit, he'd put a few maggots in to get him interested again. But the bulk of the fishing is done around this central bar. I mean, I know you can catch them from elsewhere on the pit, but this bar was where it was going on. But what I didn't want to do, I didn't want to look at the double boards and get a taste for it, because there's no way you get in there every week. Now, I used to turn up on a Thursday. Yes, it wasn't busy, because obviously you might have a few day anglers on, but because it was days, them day lads, they ain't going home until last light. So for me as a night angler wanting to get in the swim and get set up, it was always a bit of a pain in the arse, to be honest. So I decided, after I'd sort of made friends with the bailiffs, I made friends with a really nice guy named Dan. I forget his surname now. He got a lovely little dog, just dead quiet. All he did all day was smoke weed, and basically just, he loved life, you know what I mean? I ain't got a bad bone in his body. and he was just a lovely, lovely bloke. So where was the first? I think the first time I went there, I went in the swim called the Noddy. So I think there's the Noddy, and I think there's two Noddy swims. So I picked this Noddy swim, which is the short side of the island. So you've got the exposed bar in front of you, and obviously the plan is, what most people do is they fish the bottom of the shelf, like they do on the double. So the Noddy is literally opposite the double boards, but you've obviously got this dirty break bar where there was a slight depression in it where the fish, it was probably only 12 inches deep, but fish could get through. But in order they used to just swim around it all day. So I remember going in there, and I fished my first session with a mate of mine called Sam Ely and Mick Krassos. I remember I used to fish with Mick at Lynch Hill, Mick the Greek. That's the guy that we broke the diesel pump together, me and Mick. So we first session was with them. Sam was in the stick, and I went in the Noddy. So I think I'd had a 20-pounder, and then it had gone warm. Bear in mind, your ticket didn't start till 1st of June because I pulled off Welly. And it was a really warm day, but because of the cover of the lake of Frimley, you know, there was always loads of shade. But the sun had come out, and I thought, I wonder if I can get a bite in, like I say, 12, 18 inches of water. So I think it was a Saturday. It was a 48-hour rule. So even if you got a gold card, you could only do 48, and I think you had to be off for 48, which didn't matter to me, so I'd do a Thursday till a Saturday morning. So I think it was a Friday. I think the sun's popped out, and I've put a rig basically in such shallow water that if a goose had come across, there was geese on there, it could easily pick me up. So anyway, I've had a bite, and it was a 34-pounder fish, a mega character fish called Quasi. Got big hump on its shoulder, hence the name. Real character fish, loads of like misplaced scales down its flank, beautiful carp. I got loads of stick off Mick the Greek and Sam for being a spawny bastard, you know, first trip back or first trip on there. But I'd sort of been studying the swim, and obviously the fish in Frimley love to fizz. In fact, I think they fizz more than they show. And I'd got it in my mind about baiting, but because of the distance I lived away, because of certain swims, and it was a busy lake on the days, there was no way I was going to bait the main swims. And I thought, well, nobody really fishes the Noddy. But then I looked at the Noddy differently, and what I didn't want to do was bait obvious spots. So the obvious spot that most people fish around the bar is at the base of the bar, either on top of the bar or at the base of the bar. And I found some spots there, really nice spots, where it comes down, you feel the gravel, goes into silt, then it'll lock up into weed. Perfect spot, 100% catch from it, 100%. But I didn't want to put a rig there and start baiting there for somebody else to capitalise on my hard work in the week when I wasn't there. So I'd looked at the swim, and I'd looked immediately left. There was a really nice margin up to the left, and you could just get a rig down there. It was a tight cast, but it could be done. And then I was having a little lead around the swim, and probably, I don't know, 35 yards out, 40 yards, so not at the base of the bar at all, probably 15 yards short of the bar. I got a tremendous drop, so I put it in the clip, and again, pulled it back, silt. You can clearly see, even as the lead is popping through the top layers of the silt and I was dragging it back, you could see the bubbles coming up. If you went too far to the left or the right, it was a clear feeding hole that had been made, and it was probably, I'd say, 6 foot wide by 6 foot deep. Couldn't really miss it. It wasn't a dead tight spot, and because the marker was in the clip, I thought I'll pick another marker to the right, and I'll just see what that's like at the same range. So I popped it out, thud, not gravel, again silt. So moved it sort of 5 yards to the left, 5 yards, and that was dropping in weed, because I'm thinking, is the whole area short of the bar completely weed free? And I didn't want that. I wanted the fish to feel safe in the weed, but they could drift out of the weed or drift out from the bar, have a little munch on these spots, and then go about the business. I just didn't want it to be too in the face and too obvious for other anglers to be capitalising, because whilst I've made friends with Dan, the old grey matter's going on in the brain, and I'm thinking, well, I live like the other ends of the earth, he lives 2 minutes down the road, like to the point where Dan, when he does his Baileys round, he used to walk, didn't used to drive, he lives that close. So I thought, right, he hasn't really got a job, he fishes a lot of particles, because he used to fish on the donut behind on pit 4, fishes a lot of particles purely for the cost side of it, you know. He couldn't afford to buy loads and loads of boilies, so I thought, little chink here. So he used to bait up for me in the week. I showed him where the spots were, and in return, I would give him bait, 5-10 kilos a week. He was absolutely over the moon. Now, you've got to trust somebody to do this, but you know, and I look back and I'd like to think he did well, I know he did it because the spots became not only harder, but they actually moved the silt. They polished the silt off to gravel. So I wasn't getting a thud anymore, I was getting a donk. So that was telling me he was putting the bait in. So he was probably putting in 10, I'd leave him a tube of baits, I'd leave him 10 kilos, and that'd go in throughout the week. Just enough to keep the fish interested, keep the spots clean, etc, etc. At the same time, I mean, bearing in mind, I've hit the ground running here at Frimley. Stevie Renyard he'd actually come onto the lake. Him and Fudgy had come onto Frimley because, like me with the Welly days, when they upped the membership to 75, and somebody else got a ticket, you know, we always knew it was going to be carnage. So they'd pulled off as well. So we all went on to Frimley. And if I'm honest, I was absolutely flying. I was hungry. I was making a name for myself. I was just hungry to catch carp, you know. And you know when you get in that groove and everything just goes right. Frimley, for me, everything went right. Absolutely everything. I was fishing at the time. I was really into long shank hooks with like the shrink tube kicker. I've been using them a lot at like Gigantica, places like that. I don't think I didn't use them on Welly because I was using wide gates. But what I do love about a long shank is if you use quite a lengthy hair, not stupidly long, and the shrink tube kicker. I mean, obviously nowadays you can buy a kicker that's already done. But you put that in your hand and pull it over the palm test, if you like. Now, I know it's not that accurate, but every single time it turns and flips. Now, I must have lost fish at Frimley, but it wasn't a lot, honestly. I didn't lose many fish. I don't recall sort of having disaster sessions where I lost fish, because what I think is you're actually extending the gape of that hook so much from the point of the long shank to the point of the shrink tube is huge. I suppose really looking at it now, it's like the rig that Scott Lloyd uses. What's it called? Noodle rig. And he's basically put a massive lump of shrink tube on and just steamed it round. So it's like elongating the shank of his wide gape, I think he uses. But I was using 10 millers. Again, I'd had good intel about 10 millers. I was using hemp, bit of corn, because back in the day you wouldn't put tons of corn in, you just put like a scattering in your bucket just to give it a bit of visual. Now you're like bollocking the stuff in, aren't you? Tins and tins of stuff. And I was using 10 mil bait. So what I would do, I was using the dynamite hemp, and as we all know, the dynamite hemp is super, super oily. So a couple of days before, everything would go into the bucket. So the hemp, the corn, and the 10 millers. 10 millers are straight out the freezer, so any of the juicy hemp oil is being hydrated back into the 10 millers. And they loved it. They just seemed to love that little, I think because the spots started off as soft, because I was spodding it, it was short range, there was no spoms, again it was spod spill. And the way I look back is I think these spots were created by spod spill. So people would be spodding to the main bar, which was probably 50 yards. I reckon these spots were 35. And as you all know, if you've been around long enough, you used to get the spod spill out to the back of like a quarter spod. Now I think these spots were caused by that, by some of the bait landing out the spod, short the spot, and that's what's created it. But I think in the silt, so everything was super accurate. Everything was geared up for me really, because when I left, if no one was watching me, the problem was you got the double boards and the other swim next to it, you got Deep Point, you got Daisy Bay, they could all see you. Now, it wasn't that sort of lake at the time where everybody's eyes were on one person, because again, like Welly, everybody caught the fair share at Frimley. Frimley wasn't, we didn't find Frimley that difficult at all, you know, I really didn't find it tricky at all. But you had to watch what you were doing because people would sheep you up. You know, they'd go in after you, and I experienced that. And I met this guy that I thought he was no, he was a nice bloke, but he turned out to look, it isn't life or death, but I turned up one Thursday and he was in the noddy. I'd met him probably a month before, and then I used to see him every week because he was fishing the days. He hadn't got a night ticket, he hadn't got a gold tard. And I think because people like the Stevens brothers on there, Dan, all the Baileys are great guys, they all know each other. I think he knew these guys, and I reckon the Baileys had told him, I reckon Dan had told him where my spots were. And I only say that because the two in open water, he could have found. If you led about enough, you'd have found them. But the one, the left-hand spot, which was like, you were skimming the bushy, you were skimming the overhang, honestly, to get that drop, and that spot was tight. And it was the only spot in that margin, and it was light weed when I started, and then obviously after all the bait had got on it, it was polished, you know, it was silt, it was firm silt, and it went down to fine gravel. But he got a rod on that. Now, probably now, I wouldn't have tore into him now, you know, I'm kind of not like that, but I would have said something now. I was a bit more reserved back then, but I knew that there was only one reason he was in that swim, and that was because bait was going in, not 7 days a week, but it was going in all week. I'd bait up when I was fishing, I'd bait up when I left on the Saturday, Dan would probably bait on the Monday and the Wednesday, I'm back on the Thursday, you know. So this particular time he was in the swim on a Thursday. So what I think is, he'd done a day before somewhere else, seen Dan bait up on the Wednesday, he's gone in on the Thursday. We didn't have words, but I very much, from then on, I told him nothing. I sort of distanced myself from him, and it was at the time that Spug, who was involved with Mainline, Mike Redfern, came on, and I was in the noddy, and the next swim to the left of the noddy was the secret. So Spug, basically, it was ever so weird in that noddy, you know, because I never got a bite at night, but come 4 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning, liners would start. It was utterly a morning swim. So once 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock if you were lucky, if the weather conditions were good, you wouldn't get a bite after then. You literally then, you're baiting up, you reel your rods in, I might go down the Carp, or I might go down Yateley Angling, or I'd have a walk around the lake, see some of the lads. But Spug, he got it going in the secret, but all his bites were coming at night. So the problem is when you start baiting a swim, whether I was baiting the noddy, Spug was baiting the secret, and Dan was also baiting the secret for Spug, because we were both using the same bait. So looking back, when Spug wasn't there, I mean, why? Because I wasn't, even then I wasn't a mobile angler. So I would get set up in the noddy with no intentions of moving for 48 hours. They could have been jumping out for fun next door in the stick, and I wouldn't have moved. They could have been jumping out in the secret. Looking back now, can you imagine? I've had me, you know, some mornings you get 6, 7, 8 bites in the morning, but then I could have moved for the day and the night into the secret and probably caught the same amount again in the secret. But I did, you know, when you feel like you're treading on someone's toes, and that's the thing with baiting, is if you, like now, if you're going to bait a swim, everywhere's too busy, I think, now to bait a swim, but if you're going to bait a swim, don't tell anybody. You know, the fact that I was using one of the bay leaves to bait up for me, that was not my downfall, because it also helped me catch a lot of fish. You know, I had so many 30-pound commons, and I think I had 2 of the 3 big fullies. I had quasi. I had an amazing old carp that was probably 40 years old then, named Spike. That was a 30-pound in. And you see what I meant in the Welly video that we did, where you've just got to adjust your goalposts on what you want to catch. So, you know, on Welly we caught a lot of upper 30s and some 40s. On Frimley, it was all 30s, and there was probably half a dozen 6 or 7 40-pounders, commons. You got Charlie's mate. I think you'd got, again, I didn't know. You know, didn't know. All I knew was Charlie and Charlie's mate. That's all I do. But it was the natural place for a 40-pound common after Welly. On its doorstep, you know, I know the area, it's catchable. So this is, I'm sort of rocking here in the summer. It was just a case now of every week, it was tunnel vision. There was no other swims I even fished, you know. I just basically, every week, straight for the noddy, straight for the noddy, straight for the noddy. And as the summer progressed and started getting into probably the end of August towards September, I think the biggest fish I'd had, I probably had a few mid 35s, 36s, and the fullies as well. They were, you know, they were up 34s at the time. I think they're a lot bigger now. I think they're still about. And you know, when you just start to think, I'm not going to catch a 40-pounder here, and I thought I'm going to have to go and I'm going to have to move, because it seemed like deep point had done a couple of 40s. Double boards was still as consistent as ever for big fish. But I'd noticed that there was a pattern emerging that the double boards wasn't full every time I was getting there. I still didn't really want to fish it because I didn't want to get something going for it to be taken away from me and thinking when I get there someone's in the swim. But I thought if I still bait the noddy, they're still getting the bait, you know? And I just visaged the fish, they just swim round the bar. You know, basically the bar is an island because it's just some of it's submerged and some of it isn't. It's just another island, and I think they just swim round it all the time. So I surmised that as long as the bait was still going in, the fish were still eating it and I was still at an advantage, if you like. So it was at the time Carp TV was in its infancy. Joe Morgan and a guy named Nick owned it. I mean, I don't know how many fish I'd had. I've never been one for writing things down, you know. I don't know how many fish. I was having the time of my life, honestly, and it was probably the period in my life where I was hungry. I was driven. I think there was a period around probably from 2005 to 13, 14 where I was at my most virile, if you like. Nothing would get in my way. I was just intent on catching as many carp as I possibly could. And Joe Morgan had sort of spoke to me about doing some filming for Carp TV. He said, yeah, not a problem. We'd arranged to go to Frimley, Pit 3. He was allowed to fish, but I spoke to Barney. And now Barney had also, I said, look, we're filming, it's for the good cause, you know, it's for Cemex, look, it's all publicity. If I catch something, can we use a sack? Because sacking was banned. And he says, yes, you can, so, for this. So I've turned up on the Thursday. Joe was coming on Thursday, but later. So I've turned up, I'm thinking, where do I go? Double boards was free. And I thought, right, I'm trying to remember the bloody name of that swim next to the double boards. So I went to the double boards and Barney said, you can bucket the swim next door, just so that me and Joe are close for filming. So now bearing in mind, to the bottom of the bar in the boards, I mean in the boards you've got Daisy Bay to your right, and there's so many spots there really close in, it's like an egg box there. And they definitely get in that bay and you hear them at night, but most people still fish all three out to the bar, which is what I was doing. I think I'd had a couple of bream actually, before Joe set up. Joe's turned up with Nick. Nick's a non-angler, so he's bivvied up probably 6 miles away in the woods. Joe's just so chilled, he really is a chill guy. But I told him we could sack fish if we got one in the night, and, you know, for purposes of filming. So I've spotted up again because I've been breamed out. And you know when you think, I smell a rat here, you know, if you're getting breamed out, I was a bit reluctant to put too much bait in because once they're in your swim, until they've cleared you out, they don't bloody go, do they? So it gone dark, it was getting dark earlier and earlier, so Joe's hit the sack. I'm sort of chilling, if you like. And I get to bite, it was probably 2, 3 in the morning, something like that, and it was a 20 pounder. So I thought, I put it in the sack, caught it, weighed it, put it in the sack, didn't wake Joe up, nothing like that. So I've got the rod back out, and you know what it's like at night, you sort of roughly feel how much you've got to give the rod to get it. I think it was about 80 yards, something like that. So I've whacked it back out, let it settle, and I thought I'd hit the clip a bit too hard. And you know when you hit the clip, sort of, I like to hit the clip as the lead's on its downward spiral towards the surface. So it's just as it's probably a couple of foot off the surface, you can follow it and boom, and lower it down. So because it was dark, I'd sort of roughly guessed which tree I was aiming at. And I know I've hit the clip too high up, and it sprung back a bit, but then I've managed to take the tension out and it's gone down and I've got a drop. And I thought, look, that's as good as I'm going to get, it's pitch black. So I put about half a dozen spods back over the top. Because I surmised that, you know, I've had bream and I've had a 20 pounder and I thought I'd been cleared out. So probably a couple of hours later, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, something like that, same rod's gone again, but it hasn't flown off. And they were flyers at times in Frimley. It was really juttery, so it's gone up, held, dropped, up, and you're thinking, oh my God, it's a bream, just a bream take. So nonchalantly, I've sort of got out my bag, put my shoes on, because I'm not one for running out into mud, you know what I'm like. put my head torch on. I've got this routine where I have to put the head torch on. Even though I don't use it, I have to put the head torch on. Don't ask me why. So I've sort of nonchalantly got up, almost a bit pissed off, if you like, thinking it's stupid o'clock in the morning, it's not that warm. You know, it's one of them nights where it's getting colder now, and you know, you're getting the dew, and you can feel, you know, you get up in the night with a hoodie on, you can feel the temperature's a bit like, it's a bit cold. So I've sort of wound down a bit, take a bit of the slack up, lifted into the fish. I thought, that ain't fucking bream, and it's gone like that. Well, it's going, it's almost flat rod. I mean, I was that convinced it was a bream, I'd tighten the clutch right up, thinking I'm just gonna scull it in and get it in quickly. So I've then been flat rodded and had to sort of take a back stand and undo the clutch pretty quick. And you know when you undo the clutch too much, it goes zzz, and I look like a right prick, to be honest, right noddy. Luckily it was dark. And I'm thinking, this isn't a bream. Still wasn't convinced it was a big fish. Really wasn't convinced it was a big fish. And it sort of came in, didn't really do a lot. You could tell the lead was off. You could see in the sort of, not moonlight, it wasn't a full moon, but you could see it was just on the surface, lead was off. Nothing dramatic at all. And there wasn't enough disturbance to wake Joe up. So it's gone in the net first time, real textbook stuff. And because, so I've got my head torch on, put the head torch on, I'm like, Jesus fucking Christ, that is a big carp. Now I'm trying to remember the weight. Now this isn't because I've caught tons of 40-pound commons, because I haven't. You think I would remember. I think it was 43 or 42 something. It's either 42.4 or 44.2. I think it might have been 4. Anyway, it was a big carp. So I've weighed it on my own. Heads fell off completely. Bearing in mind, now looking back, I think I was in such a state about the common, the 39.15 from Welly. I think it's because Mike was there. That was why I was in a bit of a mess, because I was almost a bit like starstruck. You know, they say you should never meet your heroes. I mean, I know Ollie's met me several times now from behind the camera, and he still gets he soils himself. You know, he gets that excited. And I was quite calm, pitch black. So I've weighed it. Fucking hell, I've done it. You know, I've done what I achieved to do. I wouldn't say I've targeted a fish, because I haven't, because there was more than one 40-pound common in Frimley, but I've just done what I actually set out to do. So I've gone stupidly excited, running down to Joe, thinking that, God, this is going to make epic filming. Woke Joe up. I've gone, mate, I've got a 40-pound common. I've got it. I've got, and obviously he's just woke up and he's gone, oh, just fucking throw it in the sack then, we'll do it in a bit. Well, I already had thrown it in the sack, well, not thrown it in the sack. And we still laugh about it to this day, that like, oh yeah, just put it in the sack, be all right, I'll be up in a bit. And it was a lovely, because the dew was coming off the ground and the sun and the steam, Spug was in the secret. Because he'd been catching in the night, I think he'd had a 40-pound common, a very similar time, or I think something like that. Anyway, so at the time, he come around with his camcorder, and I'm sure he's got some amateur footage, and let me tell you, with Spug, it would have been amateurish. He would have either had his cock out, his arse out, both, too many swear words to print, but I'm sure there is footage of it somewhere. It was just one of those shots. It's not the best shot I've ever seen, but it's of the whole kind of scene, if you like, but it is a great shot of that carp. It was almost scale perfect, golden, you know, when the sun just peers above the trees, and because obviously we didn't want to keep it in the sack. I was very unsure of, because it was such a big fish, I was so nervous that as soon as it was light enough to do the shots, we did them, you know. But the sun had just peered over and it was just glistening off its flank, and it was absolutely beautiful. It really, really was. I don't know what fish it was. Steve Mogford did tell me, because obviously all the bailiffs and people that have fished it for years, they know these fish, and how these people tell commons apart, I don't know. But I didn't really care. And you know what I thought? I thought, that's it, I'm done. I went on there to catch a 40-pounder, or a 40-pound common. I'd done it. So we saw the rest of that set. We were going that morning. So we finished off the film. And it was all not an anticlimax. There was no big parade. There was no big final hurrah. It wouldn't be like nowadays. If I caught a 40-pound common now for a camera, I'd be absolutely ecstatic. It was almost an anticlimax. And when I look back, it was an anticlimax because I didn't want to leave, but I did. And I look back now and I think, why? because I'd had a lot of 30-pounders and I'd had a lot of the named fish other than the A-team. So there was probably still 5 or 6, half a dozen big fish to go at that I hadn't caught, you know. And I remember going, and the thing at Frimley, you didn't park by the lake at the time, you do now. You used to park over the train track. So you'd park in, there was like a little triangle dead end. And you had to be very careful where you park because the residents hated it. So you had to be very considerate. But you used to have to walk down over the railway crossing, which was an active railway crossing, a bit further down, through the gates, and you were there. And I remember the gates were always really noisy and no one was ever quiet back then. So if you were pulling a stroke, you could always get away with it because it seemed that the way at Frimley was you used to slam that gate as hard as you could, almost like you announcing, I've arrived. So what I did on my last close of the gate, if you like, so I've unlocked it, pushed my baler through. I'm thinking, like this, I don't want to go. I really didn't want. I've already lined another water up, as you do. And I remember slamming that gate as hard as I could, to the point where, you know, when you think you've slammed something off the gates. And I'm sure I heard somebody say, for fuck's sake, like, you know, I'd slammed it that hard. And it wasn't to annoy anybody, it was because I was going. That was my final hurrah. And I miss Frimley because it was beautiful and it was unpressured fishing for me, because I think the busiest night I ever saw on there, bearing in mind I used to fish Thursday, Friday night, but Friday night's the busiest night of the week. So a Friday night you get 4 or 5 on, you know. I'd hate to think what it's like now, it's probably 25 or something like that. And I look back and I loved my time on Frimley, but I did June, July, August, September, October and November. So I did 6 months, probably did 4 months hard fishing. But you know when you've sussed somewhere, and it wasn't because it was too easy, but I think I could have still been fishing there for another few seasons to try and catch those bigger fish, and I didn't want to start doubling up on them. You know, I caught some amazing mirrors, and you tend to find in a lake that's predominantly full of commons, when you catch a mirror, they are just beautiful because they're scaly. They're normally scattered scales, fully scaled, because they've obviously intermingled with the commons. And you know, I just thought, I've got to catch these again. Obviously, it's not right. You know, it was a long way to go from home. I don't want to start doubling up on them. I've had what I've came to catch. I wanted a 40-pound common. If I'd have said I was going to go there to catch Charlie's mate, that might have been a different thing, because this fish wasn't Charlie's mate. But that isn't the sort of person I am. I almost sort of, because I was one-track minded then, and I was chasing big fish around the country, I wanted to fish all the circuit waters, you know. So once I'd sort of finished the challenge that I set myself, that's why I slammed that gate for the last time, and that was Frimley. But you can see by the pictures and the scenery of the place, and it was beautiful 15 years ago. So what's it like now? 15 years more maturity. I mean, I've seen some of the fully scaled now that are mid-40s. So yes, they're old fish. I'm not sure if fish like spike are still in there, or quasi, the real character fish. But I think Charlie's mate, certainly that's a 50-pounder. I think my old mate Damien Clark caught that last year. So you know what it's proved. It was very well ran by Cemex. I mean, now it's been bought by an individual. I think it's just one person that owns it and runs the lakes as a complex, as a syndicate. And very well, I might add. You know, they've now addressed the parking, so you park on the lakes. There's a lodge, but I can only imagine the fishing is just unbelievable. And I've had a couple of invites, like Damien said he'll take me down on a guest, but it was a bit like Welly, that I have lots of opportunities to go back on a guest. But you know, when you've been somewhere and you almost want to remember it for what it was and for all the good times, and that was what Frimley was about for me. That I'd gone there with a plan, I'd executed that plan with military precision, to the point where I don't recall anything going wrong. You know when you think I've cracked off, or I've been cut off, or I'm up a tree, or I think because I was in tune with the water, everything was in the noddy predominantly until I went round for those few sessions in the double boards. So you shouldn't be cracking off at 30 yards, 40 yards, should you? You know, it's all catapult range if you're pre-baiting or with a spot, you know, you shouldn't be cracking off. But I loved it. It was an amazing place to fish. I think if it was closer, I'd have stayed. I think the fact it was such a long journey was what made it easier to go, if you like. But I'd set my mind to go in there on Welly to catch a 40-pound common. I caught one, I pushed my barra, I shut the gate for the last time, I played the last game of Russian roulette over the train track, which probably isn't advisable to make your life a bit more rock and roll. You play chicken with the train, you know, with your wheelbarrow full of fishing tackle. I wouldn't recommend that. But I loved it. I absolutely love Frimley. And maybe one day I'll go back on that guest just to experience, because I never really scratched the surface with the big fish. I really didn't. I never really took in, like I couldn't tell you about all the names of the swims around the rest of the lake because I never even fished them. I never even walked into it. One trap minded. I think when you set yourself a target, that's how you've got to be to catch these big fish. One trap minded. And that's how I was on Frimley.